Welcome everyone to this webinar, Financing Social Innovation. This is an event which is collaboration between the European Social Innovation Alliance, SIX, SEND, CSI, University of Heidelberg, and BMW Foundation. In today's session, we will be exploring the topic of supporting and financing social innovation, learning from different policy contexts across Europe and beyond. My name is Sojung Rim from SIX. And SIX is a global organization that believes that collaboration and exchange can generate better solutions to complex challenges that we face today. And we harness the power of diverse insight by bringing together people and examples across the world. And we facilitate exchange between organizations, sectors, and communities and countries so that we can build capabilities for more effective responses. And today, together with Katrien Elsman from SEND, who is next to me or below me, we will be co-hosting the session. Katrien, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you so much. So thank you, everyone, and a very big welcome also from my side. I'm really happy to sit here today and be able to launch the English version of our study of financing for social innovation. I'm the managing director of SEND, the Social Entrepreneurship Network in Germany. We've been working for the last 4 years in the fields of social entrepreneurship and social innovation, trying to bring together the most important actors around social enterprises in Germany and build a very good environment together with public administration, private sector, welfare sector, civil society, an environment that is fruitful for social innovation and social entrepreneurship. And we've launched the German version of the study last November. And it's full of best practices and highlights from international experience that is very relevant for an international audience. This is why I'm really happy and very thankful to the great speakers we have today here, and very thankful to you all who are listening and watching today.
So Katrien and we are both part of the European Social Innovation Alliance, ESIA Alliance Consortium, which is an EU-funded program supporting the establishment of national competence centers for social innovation across Europe. And we're particularly focused on transnational exchange between partners in Denmark, Germany, Poland, Estonia, and the UK, and also beyond our consortium as well. We think that today's topic will be really relevant for crucial institutions and organizations working to build social innovation ecosystem at the national level, at the regional level, and the local level. And so we have a very amazing webinar prepared for you today to give you an overview of what's going to happen today. First, Katrien will share a short conversation with Marcus Hipp from BMW Foundation on why today's topic is important. Then we will have a short presentation from Georgie from University of Heidelberg about the recent publication. And then my colleague Louise Pulford from SIX will have a conversation with 5 fantastic panelists: Alison Hewitt from Canada, Philippe Almeida from Portugal, Jeff Morgan from the UK, Sven Giegold from Germany, Suzanne Wiese-Huiskes from Euclid Network, who will be kind of representing the wider perspective of practitioner perspective from Europe. These panelists will share diverse perspectives, not only from different countries, but from different sectors. Louise will further introduce the panel in detail later. Before we start, a few housekeeping notes. This session is recorded, and today we will be using the Q&A function below. So you're welcome to ask questions to the speakers and panelists throughout the webinar. But you're also welcome to use the chat function as well, but we'll pick up the questions from the Q&A section. But feel free to use the chat function to introduce yourselves and comment as you are doing right now. So welcome everyone. And now I will hand over to Katrien from SEND. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and hi, Marcus. I'm really happy to have you joining us today. Markus Hipp is board member at the BMW Foundation, Herbert Quan. The BMW Foundation has co-funded this study we are talking about today. Maybe just a few words on BMW Foundation, and then Markus, and please, Markus, you can obviously add much better than I can. So the BMW Foundation promotes responsible leadership towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And the foundation has been supporting social entrepreneurship and social innovation for decades, I would say. The foundation is spearheading the development of sustainable finance and impact investing in Germany. They are also the co-founders of the German National Initiative for Impact Investing, also known as the Bundesinitiative Impact Investing. And Markus himself, he is also a board member to numerous social enterprises, and I can say, is one of the biggest experts in the field of social innovation and sustainable entrepreneurship. Welcome, Markus. So I just said it, you've been working in the field of social innovation for, I guess, more than 20 years, and I can say you don't seem tired of it yet. So why do you think this topic is so important, and facing the numerous challenges we see in today's world, why do you see its biggest potential?
Kathleen, thank you so much. And just to be here now and to see this panel and so many people from all over Europe following is amazing. And it's that's the reason that I still love to do that. Also in the beginning, that was not very clear that this is a new paradigm which will conquer kind of politics now, which is now incredible. What we have now is a totally different time how we talk about these topics. But let me start with a personal remark. I first time heard in 2002, when I still was working for the Bosch Foundation, from Ashoka and social entrepreneurship. It was Constanze Frischner. I remember that I first time heard this word, and it was a no term. But in that, I was a founder of a traditional NGO, and the first thing was resonated in this kind of new paradigm was I was a bit pissed off as an NGO founder from the traditional kind of dependency between there is a money giver on the one side, public or mostly companies or foundations, and there is this little NGO which always have to beggar. And I felt my first intuition in this new paradigm was there is another eye-to-eye relation perhaps. And if you can make it as an NGO to have an own income, at least a part in the beginning, then you get a kind of an independency to have an eye level. You can do things, but you don't have to fight every day on your kind of own job or own mission. That was my beginning. It was not this fancy, sexy Anglo-Saxon new paradigm. It was how could we make our own work more sustainable? That was how I joined this movement, and I saw from the beginning a huge potential. And what we then saw also that there is no intermediaries at all in the beginning. It was a new term, there was no players, there were small little social enterprises, new people which wanted to join this field. I think the financial crisis in 2008 was a booster because a lot of people which studied before and wanted to go to banks and stuff like that, they were looking for purpose. And so that was also, I think, a disruption for innovation, that we got new people, new students from other kind of universities as well into the field. And all this way we went along, walking the talk. We started to support social enterprises, which was not easy in the beginning. Still a lot of foundations are a little bit staying away because the legal structures is not clear. How does it fit together to make money and also to have social impact? That were all these questions you still have had also in your countries. And as well, financial instruments, regulations. You have been very often in the gray zone between, in Germany, the Gemeinnützigkeitsrecht and the other kind of incentivations, which were sometimes have been contradictory. And all that was the way long. I think the most important what we have done, and I really want to give that back to all our co-organizers, was nobody wanted to invest in intermediaries. You know, if you have a new field, a new market, the unsexiest thing is to invest into intermediaries, but I think it's the most powerful what you can do. And to have Sent in Germany and Six and others all around Europe, which have then built the field, was, I think, one of the most important things which we have done. But of course, as foundation, we then started also to pilot our own first impact investments, which was a hard way, but our pension funds managers from BMW did this. And through structural work, also they then step by step discovered this field, and new asset classes emerged, and that was important. And the other thing was also, it was great to see how scientific research around this topic came up, and the studies like this was important things that you also can show what you are doing. I remember, because Jeff Mulligan is on the panel, you remember perhaps 5 years ago we had a meeting in the Chancellery closed here, and Ms. Merkel and I think Sigmar Gabriel, they first time heard this term social entrepreneurship in a little round. How do we want to live in Germany in the future? And it's great to see now a new government which is already far ahead, also through the work of Sven, to make the next political steps on that.
Thank you, Markus. And you already mentioned a little bit the pitfalls which we have regarding regulations and regarding kind of the dichotomy between for-profit and non-profit, and so what do you think are the main challenges when it comes to financing social innovation? Why are there still so many so hesitant when it comes to impact investing and financing social innovation?
This is really a good question. I do not know why we still have to fight for more creativity in smart, also bigger kind of financial instruments, funds and stuff like that. Okay, we are recorded. There has been this scandal about this kind of co-working spaces. You remember? Billions have invested in this kind of company, and then in the end it came up, it was a lot of fraud and big mouth behind. Impact Hub, for example, which does exactly the same. You know, this global movement of incubators and space for social entrepreneurs which started. It was so hard to find first financial ways of 100,000, 200,000, a million, and there it's about billion. I don't know where is this gap. And they really created all over Europe and the world a lot of new jobs in the real social field and in the field of social innovation. And so I think it's very much about regulation, smart regulation, but not just regulation, also incentivization to go in that. I think we will hear about, I don't want to go too deep into that because it's the German perspective. We will have it in a more European perspective on the panel. We started with the social impact bonds to test it. I think there are much more experience also in other parts of Europe. I would like to hear outcome funds. I just like very much how strong the influence of smart regulation can be. In Germany, we had in the last government, they did something in the health field for the insurances, and now they have to invest some percentages into prevention. And I now just talked with Generationsbrücke Deutschland, Generation Bridge Germany, Fit for Future, or Academia, which are now growing and really scalable social enterprises within the system through strong partnership with health insurances, which have to invest a bit. And I think it's the most powerful they can do in prevention. And if we find more things like that, which also give the social enterprises in their different phases in which they are, different possibilities to grow, perhaps in the beginning, sometimes foundation within the Gemeinnützigkeitsrecht, but then also can do a step over if we have smart, like the Purpose Foundation, doing it with a kind of Bosch construction of self-ownership where we cannot put out the shares. So the ownership questions is a big topic. And then to hand over in different ways of growth, money for growth. There's a lot to do, a lot of creativity, but it's great to see now how much smart people coming into that. And also politics is joining it now. I think the field was growing despite of politics, at least in Germany within the last 15 years. And now it will also perhaps grow through politics. And for that, I think we also have then Sven and other great political leaders with us.
Awesome. So maybe my last question then, I hear you are rather optimistic, right? I mean, when it comes, let's say we have a new government in place, we have the recently, in Germany, we have recently published social economy action plan from the European Union. On the other hand, many of the things you just talked about, we've been talking about for a long time. And I also know that that when we did the study, that many of the interview partners Georgie was talking to, they said, yeah, we've been saying that for many years already. So, okay, now let's publish it again and talk about it again. So, but how optimistic are you, Markus, that that we will have a better support regarding social entrepreneurship and social innovation in the future?
To be honest, I'm optimistic as a person, but I already was very optimistic to see already in the last government in Germany, for example, that this was not really a party topic. It was a topic of all innovative parties and really democratic parties. So it's something where you directly, I think, could go into an ideological fight. And that's my hope. I think this new government in Germany, for example, started with a new attitude, which they really said they do not want to look just for the smallest, how do you say that, common denominator. It's really, they have a vision and to really want to innovate this country. And there are other governments in Europe and the European Commission as well. So I'm optimistic. I think it starts with a personal transformation of leaders. That's what we believe. In the end, it will now come up to new regulations, and then you will have the kind of political fights. And then I think it will be very much on leaders which really stand for that. And that's, if we talk about transformation of our systems and of our economy and the next step of social welfare economies, then we have to start also with our own kind of transformation and take the courage and make really innovations and not just the minimum compromises. That would be my wish and makes me optimistic.
Many thanks, Markus, for your optimism and for your kind of motivational words here. And I'd like now cut to the chase and invite Dr. Georgi Kirlev onto the stage. He is the main author of our study. He's a senior researcher at the Center for Social Investment at the University of Heidelberg. He's currently also a visiting professor at Politecnico di Milano in Italy. And he will now present the most important finding when it comes to financing social innovation.
Thanks very much, Katrin. Thanks, everyone. I'm really happy to see so many people participating, and especially from around the globe, which I think shows how important this issue is and how many people are interested in learning more about how we can effectively support social innovation, finance it, and ideally bring it to scale as much as possible. As Katrin already said, I'm going to give you just a brief snapshot of some of the insights, the main insights of our study. Let me just switch to poll mode and let me know if something goes awry here. But I think you should be seeing my screen now. So the first thing that I would like to do in opening this talk is to call on all of us to reassess our political priorities. Those people who have attended the German launch events previously might know this already, but I still think it's quite a good story. So this slide refers to a conversation that I had with the CEO of a German startup foundation, a federal one, and who was talking about the most innovative or some of the most innovative cases that they were supporting. And he was bringing up this sort of wonderful project of Spätzle shaker. Spätzle, for the international audience who don't know this, is sort of Swabian pasta coming from the region that Heidelberg and also where I come from is based. And it's a delicious dish, and obviously they funded this because it was sort of a good business case. You could do those more easily, and you could consume much more pasta. So I don't doubt that this is going to improve the world a little bit, and so I don't really challenge that these kinds of products are being funded. But at the same time, if we look at the other side of the spectrum, when we're thinking about organizations that are trying to address social inequalities, that are trying to combat racism, that are trying to increase political participation, we often have an error occurring because they don't have a business model, or they need a business model that sort of develops over time. We usually don't finance those kinds of organizations. So we're very willing to finance consumer products, but we are very hesitant to support the organizations that are actually tackling the big challenges of our time. And the bad news is, I think the problem just won't disappear on its own. So I suppose most of you have read about this or heard about this already. It's been big news yesterday, I think, when Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, brought out his annual letter to sort of the company CEOs that this biggest investment company in the world is investing in. And what he does in this annual letter is always set sort of the agenda for the next year and what CEOs are supposed to do. And some have sort of, well, he's received some acclaim by some people saying this is just a logical follow-on from the letters before, really sort of stressing, you know, we need to go net zero, sustainability is an important issue. But I was pretty disillusioned when I read the letter, because in the end, Larry Fink says, you know, these issues really going towards sustainability, solving the big problems of our time, is really not a political issue. It's not about any values. It's not about some ideology, some change in mind. And it really is about, as you see in the quote below, profit, 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 right? So as long as things are profitable, we're going to do this. And you need to do this, otherwise you're going to be led. That's sort of his main argument by others. So really lead by example. But the main motivator and sort of the triggering mechanism is always profit. Now, some of you might think, and we talked about this, and Marcus mentioned it, impact investing is different, right? Well, not quite. So if you look at the at the annual report by the Global Impact Investing Network, which came out in 2020, the last one is really looking into you know, the motivations of the investors that have responded to the survey. And if you look at the figures here, it's really only 15% who are willing to accept substantial below market rate returns or even try to preserve their capital, and don't really aim for financial returns that are on a market basis, right? So 85%, on the flip side, 85% are really still looking for financial gains. That's not a big problem as such, but if we go back to my initial argument of, you know, some initiatives just don't having a proper business model, or the business model needs a very long time to develop, or you have some sort of a hybrid constellation where you have impact generation having the primacy before financial returns, then you're running into a problem. So the question that we were pursuing here is, how can we do better? So what we did is we screened the international experiences and the international evidence from 10 countries in total. We talked to 23 experts in the field and 3 from international organizations. And what you can see here is that many countries, and I need to say in Germany, we don't have anything that's comparable at all, which was one of the motivators to actually do this study. We have many countries that have established specific financing programs, and the focus here is really on public-private financing, because we've seen if we only sort of rely on private financing, we're not going to actually see the change that we would want to see. So we're looking at different public-private financing programs across these different countries. And as you see with the principles, those are pretty diverse, right? So some of them are really focusing on local social enterprise support. Others, like Finland, are focusing more on an impact-led reform of the welfare state. The case of Portugal, we have Felipe Almeida here, is really building an ecosystem. So what you see is basically you have different approaches to how to address this issue of financing social innovation. You have a huge diversity, but you also have a very clear response to a sort of this claim that's always in the room, and which Marcus also referred to. Sort of this is really a discussion for liberal welfare states. It's more of a UK, US discussion. No, it isn't, because we see things are happening all over the place across Europe and globally, and we have very good practices of how you can put this into action. So how does the action plan, and there was a question already in the Q&A, I call it the master plan. How does the master plan look like? So I think we need to recognize 4 different strategies in supporting social innovation, which for people in the area might be familiar, but for especially decision makers in the policy field, I think are not trivial. So the first thing is that we need to prioritize process and not singular support. So this means, as you see in this graph, that we need to move organizations from a pre-seed phase to actually unleashing the impact potential. And we can't, as we often do in commercial innovation, think that these stages are sort of interlocking. We really need to build a supportive bridge to actually move organizations that are addressing social challenges from one stage to the next. We also need to recognize that we have these different types of social innovators, right? Some of them have business models, some of them have financial returns, but a large share doesn't, or at least the sort of the business models and the impact models are much more complicated than you usually see in commercial innovation. So you need to recognize that there are different types, and you need different types of support for those. One part in this, and that's why we're talking about collaborations between, the private sector and the public sector. We're talking about the role of universities, intermediaries. Marcus mentioned intermediaries. So we really need to, one of the main learnings or one of the main insights in relation to social innovation and research that is circling around it is that you need to have an ecosystem, and you should not only focus on individual organizations. And the fourth point is really that we should foster an impact orientation across society, across all society sectors, because it is essential that also the public sector is doing this transformation towards impact-oriented financing, impact-oriented buying as well, in order to support, people and organizations on the ground that are tackling persistent social problems. So the master plan, and that's why it's a bit complicated here. I won't go into all of the details, and you all, or some of you might have the report. You've seen it's posted on social media, but I'm sure SIX will also circulate to all of the participants, and we will also distribute it more widely. It's really an architecture here that needs to come together in order to address the sort of the four main principles that I was just trying to outline. So as I said, I won't go into detail into what this whole architecture is about, but the main message here is that on the top you see that we actually need something that is covering all of the different stages, from pre-seed to growth. We need something that really covers the different types of social innovators, from non-market to market-oriented, right? And that means that we need different financing vehicles. These are the ones that you see here in the middle, in order to actually put this into action. I'm going to go into a bit more detail in relation to some of those, but the main point here is that we need different financing vehicles in order to adhere to the needs of those different social innovators. And the point, and the most important point here basically when it comes to decision making, is that we can have very good partnerships between public supporters, public actors, public financiers of social innovation and private ones. On the left side of the spectrum, that's more the non-profit oriented organizations like foundations and for instance, so-called venture philanthropists or corporate social responsibility investments that corporates might be making. And on the right-hand side of the spectrum, you have more commercially oriented investors. But you need to really form these partnerships and design those vehicles in order to have an effective kind of support. The good news here is this looks challenging, this looks complicated and complex, and at the same time, the good news is we have good policy tools and policy instruments that can be used for this. So I'm just going to highlight, so we worked out 8 different ones. I'm just going to highlight 4 very briefly and then give you a snapshot of 2 of the vehicles, and then I'll open it up for discussion. So the first one, number 2 here, is tax incentives and premiums for impact. That means that you actually get a reward for generating impact, which could address some of the lack that we have in sort of viable business models, or such business models that really generate huge financial returns on their own. And if you want to incentivize impact creation, then, for instance, as a foundation, but also as the public sector, basically, you could reward that impact creation and thereby sort of level out this gap that there might be in terms of financial returns. The second one that I want to talk about is guarantees. So this is really an issue of balancing out risk, reward, and impact profiles. So if investors, private investors, are, for instance, reluctant in supporting some social entrepreneurs or other social innovators, these guarantees from the public sector might give them some sort of a risk buffer where there is much more of an incentive to go in and potentially take a first loss or carry through over longer periods of time. The fourth aspect here, and that is linked to this argument of we actually need a transformation that is going through all of society, not only through the innovators that are doing the work or the financial sectors. It really also relates to the public sector and how the public sector funds things. And basically the idea here is that you pay for impact rather than try to minimize costs, right? So this is really going into ideas of buying for social or buying for impact, which means that public procurement, for instance, could be guided by, how much value the organizations and the actors that are being funded are producing relative to this, rule that we have right now, which is really focusing on minimizing the costs, which of course is legitimized to some extent, but is not really leading us to biggest impact. And the fourth point that I want to make here is really that we need to, and that again is connected to this idea of an architecture, we really need to think about, quasi-market building and thinking about the long-term sustainability of the financing of these types of organizations, right? So if we are thinking about a working market where potentially, private investors might also have a potential to exit, their investment at some point, then there needs to be a long-term perspective. And we've talked about this, that there often is not, a commercial buyer market where these social innovations can really flourish. And so you would need to think about, could this be something that the welfare state covers? Is this something that we want to integrate into the services that we as a state think are really solving the problems? And how can we design, the financial structure so that these things are viable in the future and over the long term? As promised, I will just give you a brief snapshot of the financing instruments. I'm going to focus on the blended non-market finance and the blended market finance. You've seen that we have 5 different ones across the spectrum. And as I said, I invite you to, consult the report to dive more deeply into those. But the main message here is really that it's about a different mix, right? On the left-hand side, the blended non-market finance, you really have a mix of private actors, which have a smaller share, and public actors like the European Social Fund, social welfare budgets, but also regional budgets of municipalities that could go in combination with, funds from foundations, from CSI or venture philanthropists, in order to lever those models that are actually relatively non-profit oriented, right? But that might still have a strong impact potential. So the point here is really about pooling these kinds of resources in order to still have financial support for the organizations that wouldn't really be viable in sort of a market mechanism context, right? On the right-hand side, you have a very different constellation where, for instance, state banks take a much smaller role. It could also be combined with philanthropy, but the main investment would come from commercial investors. And you could, depending on the design that you apply here, you could even think about, venture capital really going in, pension funds, and that's one of the arguments, right? So we need to get the big players to invest socially and to invest in social innovation. And I think coming up with, structures and funds where you have these shares that are public or philanthropically oriented, these could really help balancing out what I call the risk-return impact profiles in order to have a viable investment option and to push investment in these areas, which are close to market, but might not be, flying on their own, so to say. And the other point here, and that's where, you see these things interlocking, the policy instruments that I was talking about and these specific financing vehicles. You see here that we're talking about the social procurement, which could be a huge lever in order to, really support these kinds of innovations, and also the quasi-market building in order to have this long-term future perspective and for things to be viable in the long run. So the message and the call to action that I want to send here is basically that we see this thing is challenging, right? So there's no easy fix, there's no easy solution, there's no, do X, Y, Z, and then these things are going to be working on their own. It really is a complicated and also a complex kind of issue. But that's the big but. What Katrin mentioned, we've been talking about these things for at least 10 years. So what you hear internationally is this is not a new subject. This is something that we've been proposing for quite a while. The second point is we have a lot of good practices internationally from which we can learn. So you can really see that there are different approaches to this, but especially, and that was also one of the questions that were already in the chat, I think things really only fall into place if you draw from these different experiences and you combine those, right? And if you're really serious about advancing social innovation, we can't only be talking about, ESG investing, market-based investing, but we really need to come up with clever public-private structures and vehicles, and as I said, this financial architecture in order to support social innovation. And I hope and guess that we've provided some guidance in terms of how this could look like. And I'm curious to hear what the panelists and Louise think in the discussion that's to come right after this.
Thank you so much, Georgie. The report is extensive and extremely comprehensive. So I hope you will all enjoy reading the report as much as I did. And I love the final point that you left us with, that essentially we need some innovation here. And it's about learning from all of these diverse perspectives and different kind of experiences all over the world, and seeing what we can come up with when we blend some of these different architectures and designs together. It's a real benefit that some people have been doing this for a long time, but I don't think any of us should take it for granted that we still need to continue to be creative and, as you say, adapt to the environment that we're in all the time. So thank you so much for your time. I know there are already a lot of questions in the chat, so I will do my best to get to as many of them as possible. We may not be able to get to all of them. And so I'm sure perhaps by reading the report, some of your questions may be answered. And if not, I'm sure we can connect you to the relevant people afterwards if you want to have that further conversation. For now, though, let me just introduce myself a little bit. My name is Louise. As So said earlier on, I work with So at the Social Innovation Exchange, or SIX, and we really believe in the power of exchange for good. At SIX, we try to drive social innovation globally through the exchange of knowledge, expertise, innovation and inspiration. And we facilitate collaborations that are genuinely valuable exchanges between the organizations, sectors, communities, and nations that we work with. It's a real privilege today to be able to host this dialogue with all of you and go deeper into some of the things that Georgie talked about in the report. We have about 40 minutes here with 5 incredible panelists, and each of them could speak for 40 minutes plus on this topic. So unfortunately, we'll have to kind of move through, but we'll keep it as dynamic as possible. I could probably speak for about 40 minutes about all of their bios as well, because they're very accomplished, very experienced people with a real diversity of experience themselves. And so I will just quickly introduce them. If you want more information about them, I'm sure you can go to various websites and learn more. And if I forget anything that's important for this discussion, please just add in as we go. So firstly, wonderful to introduce Felipe. Felipe Almeida from Portugal Social Innovation, who was mentioned on the left side of that diagram as an example of the kind of blended non-market finance. And so Felipe is going to tell us a little bit more about his experience as the president of Portugal Social Innovation. He's also a professor at the Faculty of Economics of the University of Coimbra, where he's from, and a researcher in the Centre for Social Studies. So we are all looking to Portugal in our European work at the moment, particularly on financing. So thank you so much for being with us and sharing. Next, I'm going to go over the pond to Alison Hewitt. Alison, welcome. I've had the privilege of knowing Alison for probably over a decade now. Alison is coming from Mars Discovery District in Canada, which is North America's largest innovation hub, for those of you who don't know it. Real leader in social finance as an organization, but she is also herself, and she develops and has led and leads most of the social innovation programs at Mars and the social finance programs. And she's been instrumental in growing the ecosystem across the whole of Canada, working collaboratively with lots and lots of partners, working on public education, influencing public policy. She's recently been working on a task force with an extremely catchy name, which she will introduce to us, advising the Canadian government on social innovation and social finance. So thank you so much, Alison, for being with us and sharing that part of your work with us today. Next, I'm going to go back to Germany, actually, and introduce Svengie, who is a German politician from the Alliance 90, the Green Party, and you've been serving as Secretary of State, the State Secretary, sorry, in the Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action in the newly formed coalition government since 2021. But before that, Sven was a member of the European Parliament for many years, 2009 to this year, I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong with that, but brings not only his experience of being inside government at the moment, but also working on that European scale. So Sven, thank you so much for taking the time and sharing with us in your official position. Susanna, sorry, from Euclid Network. Welcome. So lovely to have you here with us. Again, someone representing a European perspective. Susanna joined Euclid Network and has started to lead it in 2018, bringing together a decade of experience in alternative and social finance, particularly around impact investing, crowdfunding, startup accelerators. But today, I think, Susanna, you're wearing the hat representing civil society organizations. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that. And finally, Jeff Mulgan. Nice to see you, Jeff. Thank you for joining us. Jeff's the Professor of Collective Intelligence, Public Policy and Social Innovation at University College in London. Prior to that, he led NESTA, the National Endowment for Science, Technology and the Arts. So can talk to us again from a funding perspective, but has worked in government, in NGOs all over, and advised governments all over the world, and has written some of the publications that Georgie has probably referred to on social finance over the last 10 years. So thank you so much for all being with us. Let's start with Philippe, since you are the shining example in Europe around ESF and social finance at the moment. Can you tell us a little bit, please, about Portugal's social innovation, how it works, and your kind of experience, how it differs from some of the things that Georgie's been talking about?
Of course. Thanks, Louise. Hi, everyone. And thank you for inviting me to join you in this event and the opportunity, one more, to share our experience from Portugal. And let me just start by congratulate Georgie, CSI, Sven, and all their partners for this very impressive study that really presents very interesting recommendations and highlight some of the major challenges that we've been facing in different countries and contexts. Concerning the Portuguese case, as we all know, in order to address the highly complex and interdependent social and environmental challenges that we face today, it's crucial to develop strong and meaningful partnerships between the public, the private, and the social sector, as Georgie was saying. And this was the underlying reasoning behind the creation of Portugal Social Innovation back in 2014 by the Portuguese government. The vision of the government was that, on the one hand, the recognition that the public sector would never have enough resources or competencies to deal effectively with all social problems. And on the other hand, the vision that social entrepreneurship could actually be a good solution to come up with new ideas, new solutions for these problems, and also inspire the evolution of public policy. So with these ideas in mind, the Portuguese government created Portugal Social Innovation, which is a government initiative that mobilized around 150 million euros of the European Social Fund in the programming period from 2014 to 2020, with two main objectives. First, to promote social innovation and finance social innovation projects. Second, to develop the social investment markets in Portugal. And with these two objectives in mind, we've created 4 financing instruments with 2 basic assumptions. First, each of these instruments is aligned with a specific stage of development of a social innovation project. So it addresses specific financing needs and specific potential for impact in projects in different levels of maturity. And the second assumption, to develop the social investment market, all of these instruments assume the development of partnerships between the investors, social investors, and the entrepreneurs and social organizations. So there is a seat at the table for investors in all of the instruments. So with these ideas in mind, we've created 4 instruments, as I said. First, we have a capacity building program for developing management competencies for early stage projects. Then we have a match fund for leverages philanthropy. Then we have a social impact bonds program, which is, as you know, an outcome payment instrument for contracting and paying for measurable social outcomes aligned with public policy priorities. And finally, we have a financial instrument with a debt stream that provides guarantees for loans and an equity stream that invests in equity in SMEs alongside with private investors. So we have this set of different financial solutions to address the ecosystem and create pipeline, and also bring into play the private and public investors as well. Just a few figures. To this date, we have approved 689 projects all over the country. That represents 143 million euros, of which 96 million euros come from European funds and national budget, and 47 million euros comes from social investment. Of these 47 million euros, 30 million euros are pure grants, 12 million euros go for social impact bonds, and then around 5 million euros for investment in equity. And that happened in the last 4.5 years. So we are very excited with the potential of the ecosystem and what we brought to the market. And sorry, I took a few more minutes than I should, but I'll leave to the next rounds the discussion on what went well, what went wrong, what things we need to adjust as well. Thanks.
No problem at all, Philippe. Thank you for giving us that context and that background and that incredible detail around those figures at the end. I'm going to go now to Alison in Canada, Alison Hewitt. Thank you for being with us, Alison. The same question. Tell us a little bit about the Canadian experience.
Yeah, I'm pleased to. Thank you so much. And so wonderful to have the opportunity to join this group, and certainly a huge fan of SIG from day one, and your ability to bring together these global players. So thank you for that, Louise. Really appreciate it. So Canada has a really long history of social innovation. You know, Greenpeace was from Canada, palliative care, the Women's Institute, which Jeff Mulgan called the forerunner to the modern day women's movement. I've learned a lot about social innovation in my own country from Jeff Mulgan. Thanks for him. And while it's been a sort of subtle part of our history, I would contend that we really only got serious about building this culture of social innovation and thus funding it in about 2007. So at that time, the J.W. McConnell Family Foundation assembled a group of players from across the country under an umbrella initiative called SIG, or Social Innovation Generation. This was a 10-year-long program designed to build a culture of social innovation in Canada. So as I was reflecting back for these thoughts, the very first thing that came to my mind is the importance of financing social innovations only happens with a visionary, risk-taking funder. Be that government in Felipe's case, so that was so impressive. I'm so excited to learn more about what you're doing. And in our case, it was the philanthropic sector. It was the McConnell Foundation, which has been amazing. And they approached Mars. Now, Mars, as Louise said, was an innovation hub, but we focused mostly on the commercialization of research out of the academic health science centers. So Canadians, probably like many others, are great at research and not so great at commercialization. So we have this really big building, about 1.5 million square feet or 140,000 square meters in downtown Toronto. But McConnell came to Mars and said, we love what you're doing with innovation on the technology and medical side. Can you please add social innovation to it and do something that is uniquely Canadian? And together they went to the province of Ontario to fund this work. And I was brought in 2007 to lead SIG at Mars. and we supported literally hundreds of social enterprises to increase their income and increase their impact. So I think a second lesson there is really it's easier to get funding and support after someone takes that initial risks, and then when partners go together to government instead of just one entity asking for the support. Early on, we did what this group did. You know, we looked outward to see who was doing great stuff, and we organized a UK study tour because the UK was about at least 10 years ahead of us on this journey. And people like Jeff and Ronald Cohen were on a mission and to really share their incredible wisdom, and we were ready to soak it up like a sponge. So really bravo to the folks who supported this survey and looking out, because it's the only way you're going to learn. And we're forever grateful to Sir Jeff and Sir Ronnie. And I guess it helps if you give people a title in this field. I'm very interested in that. So we diversified our approach to funding as part of building this larger ecosystem. We had academics and practitioners, and really Mars provided this institutional home. And I think another lesson for me is how wonderful to have a physical manifestation of what it is that you're trying to support. And Mars became that place. It became a place to convene players not only nationally, but globally. And then in 2010, we launched the Canadian Task Force on Social Finance, and we found out about it from the UK. We based it on that. But the first thing we did was we got a really high profile person to come and join us, a former Prime Minister, Paul Martin, who was also the finance minister. So getting these kind of influential champions really helps accelerate your work with others. And then in 2017, the federal government convened 15 players from across Canada. And this is the wonderful title that Louise talked about, to convene a social innovation and social finance strategy for Canada. We were a strategy co-creation working group. And one of our recommendations was the creation of a social finance fund. Now, this seed had been planted through that work that Paul Martin's group, he didn't lead it, but you know, he was the most famous guy, so it often got called Paul Martin's group. They planted the seed in 2010. And then we did this social innovation strategy. And then in the fall economic statement of 2019, the federal government announced a $755 million social finance fund with an additional $50 million to create investment readiness. So we're still in the process of seeking a wholesaler who will run this fund, but we're very excited about the opportunities for it. But we did recognize how much work had to be done to build the capacity of people. So really the big lesson is building and financing a culture of social innovation takes patience and it takes perseverance. But this group is off to a pretty amazing start by looking globally and hopefully leapfrogging over all the rest of us. Thank you, Louise.
Thanks, Alison. I'm going to turn over to Jeff now, actually, to talk at this stage of the conversation from the UK experience. You were involved in this movement back in the beginning, and so what can what is your kind of perspective of what's happened in the UK, what's worked, and kind of where we are now? And I think picking up on those kind of visionary points could be interesting as well. So thanks, Jeff.
Well, great. And thanks for the invitation to be with this fantastic group, and congratulations to the authors. It was a really, refreshing report. And I really do hope in this space, as in many others, that Germany can do the things we're not doing very well in my country at the moment with the new coalition. So I thought I'd just make three points. The first is that if you look at funding of innovation of any kind, it's always quite a complicated ecosystem, a hybrid. So our funding for medical innovation, vaccines, COVID treatments is a mix of grants and loans and equity, advanced market commitments, guarantees. And over the years, these systems have built up and they now spend 2, 3, 4, 4.5% of GDP in some countries on science innovation. And it means that if you do have an idea for a vaccine, there's a very well-established route from the basics research through to large-scale implementation and billions of vaccine doses. We still don't really have the equivalent for social ideas, social solutions, new models of care, solutions to homelessness, food waste, you name it. But this is, in a sense, what we've been trying to do. So second point, the UK experience, I was involved in really quite a few different attempts to build up bits of this ecosystem. So some of it started with government 20 years ago, setting up funds of various kinds for early stage ideas, projects, and so on. We created a wholesale bank in the form of big society capital with hundreds of millions of unclaimed assets to in turn fund intermediaries, and that's gone reasonably well. I oversaw several impact investment funds, both purely social ones and arts-based ones and so on, trying to combine financial, social, and sometimes other returns. And then there were quite a few accelerators, social accelerators of different kinds. If you'd asked me 10 years ago, I thought we were on track to the beginnings of a more mature ecosystem at every stage. The truth is, though, things have stalled in the UK. We've been distracted by little things like Brexit, and not much progress has been made. And in some ways, we've been missing some of the risk-taking, the ambition, the creativity, which we now see in countries like Portugal and Canada and Germany. And I think we had that before. So I feel a little bit embarrassed being on this panel when I feel we've sort of not made the most of our opportunities. What I like about the report is its sophistication. There are very different stages to social innovation and different kinds of funding needed for a startup, for a project, for scaling and growth. We found it much easier having low risk investment in things like housing projects or renewable energy, where you had fairly predictable returns, and always, if I'm honest, struggled with the higher risk, more radical, more ambitious ideas. Getting that kind of investment was always hard. And in the commercial world, venture capital only really works because usually the public sector has taken most of the risk of the early stage research in the internet or artificial intelligence. And there's a bit of an equivalent, I think, in the social field, which we sometimes lose sight of. I think procurement is really important. I guess one big lesson I learned was that money is helpful, but nearly always it's money plus contacts, advice, ideas is the crucial thing. And often an early commercial contract or a public sector procurement is vital alongside the capital influx. And then we've also learned lots on new asset classes, 200 or so social impact bonds now worldwide. I haven't changed my view much in 15 years on them, that I think they are a very useful part of the ecosystem, but were massively overhyped in terms of what they could do. But they are useful in bringing greater rigor into thinking about the relationship between financial inputs and social outcomes. So just to echo what Alison said, I mean, we are really looking to you guys now, especially in Germany and other parts of Europe, to drive this field forward so we can then copy you in a few years' time when our environment is a little bit more favorable.
Thank you, Jeff. I promise I won't ask you to represent the UK again in this discussion. I'm just going to switch a bit and go to Sven, if you don't mind, first before Susanna, just to bring this into bring it back to the kind of German experience and ask you, Sven, as someone on the inside, to pick up on some of the things you've heard already in your perspective on the report. You are taking you are coming from a different perspective on this. So can I just ask you for your first remarks as well, please, Sven?
Thanks. Thanks for the invitation and also the report. Look, first, to put myself into perspective, I had my own past setting up, now you would call it a social innovation incubator. We weren't that cool. We were just setting up cooperatives and social businesses and boring stuff like that. And therefore, I find the different sub-sectors and the new renaming of things always also amusing. I would say a lot of the ideas you are doing, you are supporting, were already with the good old cooperative movements coming from the Rochdale pioneers in the good old UK, and you will find a lot of overlap of what they have been doing. Now everything has to be cool and and therefore we have new terminology, but in the end it's always achieving impact, as you would say, for real people, for the environment, for the common good, alongside with business interests and business means. And I have to say, I also entered here as a green politician, a house with a lot of history. So this is the economics ministry, which was the cornerstone of rebuilding the economy after the war, and was where the social market economy concept was put into practice in Germany. And look, and what I would say on the report and on the discussion we are having, that there's also a very important aspect when it comes to speaking about the economy and the economic order, which has to do with achieving impact, because our economic model in Europe is not capitalism, it's the social market economy. This means not only some actors in the economy have ethical obligations, everybody does. So according at least to the German constitution, the European treaties, the whole of the economy has also to serve social means. And this includes, of course, today, environmental means. So therefore, it is so critical that the environment for the economy as a whole is geared towards the common good, so that competition, innovation, entrepreneurship can help achieving societal ends. So, and this is what, as a politician, first and foremost, we are responsible of, which means, for instance, to end unfair competition. So, which I would say is pricing environmental and social bads. And on the other hand, reducing externalities. So if some people in the market exploit others, then this reduces the chances of those market players which treat their workers with decency and with respect. At the same time, so this means putting rules in place which support by ending negative externalities, by ending unfair subsidies to exploitative business models, putting rules in place which end these models helps logically everybody who wants to serve also social and environmental ends. And this legislative framework, this fiscal framework geared towards this, will also help all economic actors which act with decency and respect for the common good. I wanted to say that because this more traditional view of what supporting business which serves at the same time social and environmental ends was little discussed here and is so important. When it comes to the new government, as was indicated, we have also, thanks to the work of Sven, we have a decision and a clear mandate to draw up a national strategy in support of social business and social innovation. And I will be the responsible state secretary to make that work. And therefore, I welcome very much the study, and this can serve in many ways as a role model for what we will be implementing in the area of financing. However, it's not only about finance, obviously it's about the enabling sector. It is also about making sure that there is public awareness and attention, that we support clusters for social innovation and social business. We have a clear mandate to use the procurement system to make it less bureaucratic, more accessible for all small actors, but also favoring social and environmental products in the public procurement system. And I will also feel responsible to open all programs for innovation, as well as structural funds and business support programs for the whole diversity of actors, including also businesses which do not have a pro-profit main mandate, so that they are truly open to all actors. But we will have an open consultation process on the drawing up of the strategy. We will start with the first also support program to social businesses financially. And beyond that, I think social innovation, as you describe it, is great, but it should be part of a social market economy, a social environmental market economy, which puts the framework right for all businesses rather than only growing those who care. We also have to limit the damage those do which don't play by the rules for the common good.
Thank you, Sven. So much in there to unpack, and I think our German colleagues will have some responses to that too. So feel free to questions and comments in the chat. I'm going to go to Susanna next to kind of link us as well into the next part of the discussion. You're representing a European network, in particular, lots and lots of civil society, social economy actors on the ground. So I'm interested, based on the conversations so far, your perspective on what you're seeing happening across Europe, what your community needs, but also, you know, as we move forward in the discussion, I'm interested in all of you and the kind of the favorable conditions, that ecosystems that you have in place that enables these things to happen. So maybe you could respond to that as well as we move into the next part of the discussion. So Suzanne, thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Louise. And I've been listening with great interest. First of all, congratulations to all of those who worked on the report. I think what you managed to do is simplify a very complex topic. And not only did you serve us great best practices, as Philippe and Alison and Jeff mentioned, but I think also this report can really be a best practice in itself for other countries as well who are working on this. As mentioned, our network consists of social enterprise national networks, such as SEND, for instance, but also researchers like CSI Heidelberg and incubators all over Europe. And the challenges highlighted in the report are certainly challenges that also appear in these European countries. And I wanted to look at what was highlighted in the report, you know, how important it is to support all types of social innovators, early stage, but also growth, to really nurture the ecosystem. I know that Marcus Hibb mentioned indeed that it's the most important thing to invest in intermediaries, but also very unsexy. And I heard that Sven mentioned indeed about how uncool it was when he first started working in social enterprise. So I think there's a big job for us to make it sexy and cool, but certainly private funders and public funders are recognizing the importance of the ecosystem. And that's the space that we're working in. So what I wanted to highlight is also because this report is really looking for how can it be done? You know, the challenges are quite clear, but how do we then move forward and take and respond to it in the best way possible, and really learning from others in Europe, but also Canada and other continents. So if you look at financing vehicles, what I see in Europe are two amazing opportunities for social innovators. And the ecosystem, the first of all, is focused on Accelerator Loans and grants. So in the report, it was highlighted how important it is to provide financial support, but also capacity and capacity building for social innovators. And one opportunity that is coming up is the Social Innovation Fund recognized how important it is to build the social enterprise ecosystem by the Google.org Foundation, which is launching this year in a number of European countries, and inviting social innovators in an early stage, but also in a growth stage to take part in that. So that is a financial gain, but also capacity building. Another part of that, which is amazing, is that the fund is also investing in ecosystems. So it is also investing in social enterprise national networks, which is obviously a great step forward, as previously was less recognized by funders. If you then look at public funding in Europe, another opportunity for social innovators and social enterprises is the InvestEU guarantee. So previously named EU Fund for Strategic Investments, what we learned over the past year from that is that it wasn't as accessible. And this is another challenge that we have throughout Europe. Where do you access these funds? And so the Invest EU fund is really focusing on being accessible in all regions, working with local banks. So for social innovators, it's important to apply to local commercial banks. And as a network, we're working very hard to make sure that this message is reached either towards our members or in other social enterprise national networks, but also for social innovators themselves, to make sure that the funding that is accessible is used by these social enterprises. So far, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Suzanne. I'd like to go back to Alison actually at this point in terms of picking up on the kind of ecosystem point, the conditions point, but also that the accessibility that Suzanne has just left up on. How do you make sure these things are more accessible for people? And I'm also going to just remind the speakers to just kind of wave at me if you have a point that you want to kind of pick up on that somebody else has just said as well. So yeah, Alison.
Yeah, so I think an ecosystem approach is absolutely critical because you need to have this whole range of understanding. And what we chose to do in Canada, which may or may not work in other countries, but I think the opportunity to explore it is interesting, is that we looked at where the money was. And so when Jeff talked about the money going into R&D and it's science and technology ventures, and instead of setting up something separate, we tried to leverage it, but it was always someone's job to be focused on the social impact side of things. And so a lot of our ventures are in the clean tech space, which is pretty grown out as an ecosystem. A lot of them are in health. And so these folks were responsible for, major breakthroughs in terms of COVID and things. Those worlds are blurring and blending in a way that they weren't historically. And when I first started, people would come and say, like, what corporate form should I have? Like, I don't know if I just want to be a nonprofit or even a co-op. And Canada's got a huge, proud history of co-ops as well, Sven. Like, we're very proud of that. And they were looking for something that said, I don't want to profit maximize. I want to do something else. And we didn't have any hybrid corporate structures. Now we have a whole bunch of them. Right. And so all of these things are ecosystems. It's the policy level, it's the academic research, it's leveraging what exists. It's all of that. It's really about, the classic looking down and seeing what you need to do, but also looking up and making these unusual connections that others can't make. I think that was probably the, from my work at Mars, probably the most helpful in understanding how we're going to get to real scale and real impact.
Thanks, Alison. Philippe, let me come back to you from your experience in Portugal, thinking about those kind of, the ecosystem, the conditions, and also where you think, where you're heading as well. It's kind of be a bit more future thinking in this discussion.
Well, let me just speak on what Alison was saying, because a big part of our job is to do just that. Let me just remind that the Portuguese case is quite unique because this is a top-down approach, not a bottom-up, which is common in social innovation, because it was the Portuguese government that created this main structure, mobilized funds to develop the ecosystem. Usually it doesn't work like that. It's not happening like that. So because we are using public money, European and national budget money, our focus is not only on the innovation side. Our focus is on the problem that it tries to solve. So we must be agnostic concerning the type of organizations and the approach to the problems, because the focus is on the social problem, on the social challenge from a corrective or preventive perspective. It means that we equally finance solutions that are market-oriented, that have a business-oriented solution for a social problem, but we also finance solutions that would never generate revenues to be economically sustainable, but are effective on dealing with the social problem, because we are looking at all these experimentations from the point of view of solving the problem. And some of these problems can only be solved at a national scale from a public policy perspective with public funds. So we don't close the door to those solutions. And now what I was saying about Alison is that the main, if I had to choose a main challenge that we have every day and an advice for someone who is going to develop a strategy like this one in Portugal, is that what Alison was saying. The main challenge, I would say, that is to find the champions in central government, in municipalities, in universities, in social economy organizations, in the high potential investors, adjust the message to their specific needs and perspectives and bring them all together. Because the perspective, and this is a major challenge, this is what we do every day. In Portugal's social innovation structure, we have money, we have the instruments adjusted to the market needs, but we've created inside the structure an activation team of regional representatives that have their feet on the ground, that work daily with entrepreneurs, with local governments, with investors, making bridges among them, helping to transform good ideas into good projects that then can apply to our calls. And this was crucial to develop the ecosystem. It's not just to have money and the good financial solutions. It's important to work closely in the ecosystem, know the problems that are on the ground, work in the territories with entrepreneurs, and making this intermediary approach to the ecosystem. That's a very important part of what we did. And let me just add, one of the lessons that we learn is that we learn to equally value disruptive innovation, which is more common in social innovation ecosystems, but also incremental innovation. We learn that more mainstream, traditional social organizations can be highly innovative if they have the right incentives as well. So everyone is invited to come to this process, and we are working with every part of the social, private, and public sector. One of the things that didn't work, as I like it to work, is that we don't have yet a strong and effective link between the experimentation that is going on the ground with these social innovations and public policy. Public administration is not yet completely open and aware of the potential of these innovations to inspire the evolution of public policies. And one of my concerns in the near future is to make this connection more effective so that we can actually take advantage of all this creativity that is really working on the ground to inspire the evolution as well of public policies. I rest my case.
Thanks, Philippe. Jeff, I don't know whether you want to just come in on that point, making that link between experimentation and public policy from the experience that you've had, not just in the UK, but in the various institutions that you've worked in.
Yeah, so a couple of comments. I mean, one is just to go back to what Sven said. I think it's very important to see the historical roots of this. Sometimes it was presented as social finance and investment was something brand new. I wrote a long piece for an Oxford University Press book on this, trying to say, well, actually in the 19th century, we had all sorts of investment in co-ops and mutuals and microcredit. Germany has fantastic traditions. Italy has fantastic traditions. And when SIX was created, in fact, Mondragon was the first partner of SIX, a very strong co-op. So it's really important to not have a sort of year zero perspective on this. That said, as Alison mentioned, the innovators themselves often want very different legal forms to express what they're trying to do. It might be a co-op or a mutual or a social enterprise or a for-profit with a social purpose. We invented a new legal form, community interest companies, to allow equity and therefore different models of investment as part of a richer ecosystem. And things like matched crowdfunding, which is, I think, quite an interesting new model of funding, again, often needs slightly different legal forms. And there's also an issue I didn't mention of tax incentives. We created social investment tax incentives, which had some success, but again, as part of creating an ecosystem. But I think the key point, echoing what Felipe said, is this thing about risk and appetite, incremental or radical. We're having a big debate this week in the UK about the future of broadcasting. prompted by what's happening with Netflix and Amazon and Apple TV. It's worth remembering none of them make any money. Like most digital innovations, they expect huge patience in terms of returns, and we still lack any kind of investment in the social field with the willingness to wait 5, 10 years before you make a profit. So it's perhaps not surprising our digital economy is totally dominated by American commercial platforms. And anyway, it's a question, I think, collectively for us of whether we can solve that bit. And then, of course, there is the challenge with all that we're talking about of how you capture the complexities of value in the social field. So some social enterprises may be selling vegan food, are selling to customers. That's quite a straightforward business model. Others may depend on something like a carbon price to make their actions viable. Others may get by if there's a government willing to procure their solution for care or homelessness, but often the most radical social innovations don't yet have a market or a demand or a purchaser. So we're talking about a very complex value landscape, which again is why you sometimes need this diversity of funding, some philanthropic, willing to take big risks with uncertain returns, some much more aligned with public value and what the state thinks is value, and some selling essentially direct to customers as the original co-ops did. And it's exactly right in this report to recognize you need different solutions for different parts of the ecosystem. Thanks,
Jeff. And we only have a couple of minutes left, so I'll go to Sven and then I'll come back to you, Suzanne, to finish us off. And so Sven, what do you need as somebody responsible for developing these kind of strategies going forward? What do you need from the wider ecosystem, the community? How can particularly people in Germany, but how can we help you in your task going forward as someone who's doing it from the top down at the moment?
This is funny. Normally, I'm never asked from people how they can help us. They rather lobby us for help. So it's a very surprising positive atmosphere type of relations with politics. But anyway, no, look, I think I was always struck also during my time in Brussels by the fact that there are so many different sub-communities which are always organized around a certain type of actors, type of terminology, and they never unite. So, and they don't lobby together. If everybody who would be around ideas of social innovation, social businesses, cooperatives would get their forces together, you would be a huge and powerful lobby. But everybody prefers to build their own identitary circles. And these identitary circles weaken the whole sector. So if you account all jobs, which are neither in the state sector nor in traditional only for-profit companies, you have about 10% of all jobs in the EU. 10% of the jobs would make a more powerful lobby than the cars, chemical industry, or digital giants. Reality in parliament or government is you hardly ever get visits from cooperatives, social innovators, and the like. You get lots of visits from cars, chemicals, and all the rest of it. So my main call would be build a big lobby, overcome identitary subsectors, and try to join forces with everybody who want to do business with a social or environmental purpose. And if you manage to build such alliances, you will change the world also politically, because no one can ignore you anymore. That would be the main help for people as myself who try to build the supportive structure inside of politics. But I need also actors from outside to rebalance the public interest sphere and public affairs sphere. And there I think you are much bigger than you think, and you are much bigger than your public representation. And I think that's really an important job on the European level, on the global level, on the national level, in the regions. So make yourself stronger. And I'm trying what I can, and we are trying to do what we can, and happy to learn from you, and you can make your voice louder.
Sven, thank you so much. So Susanna, what are we going to do together?
What are we going to do together? Well, building on the comments of my fellow panelists, just I would say one sentence capturing that. Indeed, we need to unite, but what do we need to make this happen is really people that can be able to move between these different actors, so that understand, that a private investor is not speaking the same language as a policymaker or a startup founder or a researcher. So we have different types of people indeed. This was mentioned before. So you really need people that can be building bridges between these different actors. And I think that's what we're doing here already. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Susanna, and thank you to all of you. The diversity that we talked about and on this panel is a wonderful thing, but it's a challenging thing to harness it together. I really appreciate your time. Thank you all for participating. And I'm going to hand over to So.
Well, as final closing, again, thank you to the speakers who have shared your insights with us today. And thank you very much to the organizing team behind the scenes, particularly Sina from University of Heidelberg and Fie from SIX for all your support. And thank you to all the audience members for your generous participation and your comments today. And we'll share the event recording and report with you as a follow-up email. And we hope to see you in our future events. And if you have any questions and would like to connect with us, please contact us at the email that my colleague is posting on the chat. And this year we're launching a podcast exploring diverse kind of cultural, political, social context of social innovation in Europe. And we will continue these conversations that we started here today in this podcast. So keep in touch and thank you very much, everyone. Bye, thank you.